Hi there. If we haven't met yet, I'm Belinda. I'm a printmaker and painter, and I love to share art making methods on this channel with you. In this little video, we're going to take a look at making a dark field monotype with acrylic paint and a recycled plastic food container that I snipped off of, I think this was blueberries, but you know the food containers that I'm talking about. If you live in the United States and perhaps even in Europe, there's a lot of plastic clamshells that hold things like nuts and blueberries and tomatoes and all sorts of produce. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate briefly in this video. First, let's find the smoothest section of the container with no logos or impressions in the plastic. Use kitchen or craft scissors to trim the section from the plastic container that you want to keep. After a smooth, flat sheet of plastic is removed from your container, you can straighten your edges by using a Sharpie Magic marker with a ruler, and then trim the crooked edges off with your scissors. If there's any fingerprints or stickiness on your new printmaking plate, wash it with warm water and dish soap. Try not to scratch the surface or it will leave marks that you can't remove in your print. If you don't have printmaking ink, let's use some slow-drying acrylic paint with a fine spray bottle of water, a paintbrush, and some mark-making tools. I've printed a reference photo in black and white for my computer and trimmed it down to be the same size as the plate. My tabletop is a sheet of acrylic, so I'll use masking tape to hold the reference photo still. But you can tape your image to a sheet of cardboard or a table covered with newsprint or scrap paper. Line your plate so that it's centered over your reference photo. I've got a little extra plate compared to the height of my photo, so I'll just scoot the plate up to meet the lower edge of the reference image. This is Stabilo Woody water-soluble crayon, and you can skip this part. I was testing to see if the crayon outline would repel the paint and leave a nice map in the pigments, but it didn't work. Acrylic paint is manufactured to dry fast, but we need them to stay wet until we're finished making our image. Golden Open acrylic paint is slow drying, but if you have traditional acrylics, you can use Liquitex Slow Dry Fluid Retarder to slow your drying process. I'm adding a tiny amount of water, which will thin the paint enough to see the image under the plate. The opacity of your acrylic paint will vary by each manufacturer's pigment load recipe. If your acrylic is not sheer at all, add a little bit more water, but don't overdo it. We need the paint to be stiff enough to preserve the marks we'll plow through and over the paint. We have just enough water here to make the pigment semi-see-through. With a light hand and an angled brush, drag the paint in a single layer, one band at a time, over your plate. If you have a brayer, you can roll it onto the plate. You should be able to see enough of your reference photo through the paint to pull out the bigger shapes. It helps if you choose a reference photo that has a simple design and some high contrast. It also helps to print 2 copies of your photo so that you have one underneath your plate and one nearby to look at. I'm using a rubber-shipped clay shaping tool to find the edges of the larger shapes. I'll leave a link to my blog in the comments, and I'll list all the materials in that post. I'll also list alternative tools you can use in case you don't have these. After I've cleared the biggest and lightest shapes, I want to add some texture. I'm pressing paper towel into the paint to add interesting texture in the water around the sailboat. This definitely lifted pigment and left a lighter halftone, but be mindful of removing too much moisture this way. If the paint gets too dry, it won't release from the plate and adhere to the paper. Wipe the edges of your ink in a straight line, even if your plate is cut crooked, and you'll have a nice even monotype print. Once you have your basic shapes revealed, you can experiment with mark making using simple tools like a dry paintbrush. This is a synthetic flat paintbrush, and I'm just pushing the paint around to create halftones and textures. Use a paper towel, a rag, or an old phone book page to blot the brush clear of the pigments and keep it dry. Now back to the clay shaping tool, which has a rubber tip. It's sort of like a windshield wiper. If you don't have this tool, you can use a cotton swab, a paper towel twisted into a pointed tip, or a pencil eraser to get a similar effect. I'm lightening the background to increase the contrast so that the figure will stand out. You can also do this by making marks that are so different from the figure that he'll stand out not as high contrast but more subtly as a textural shift. Experiment with this concept on multiple fast and loose monotypes to see if it fits your aesthetic tastes. As I mentioned before, the pigment is drying too fast because I blotted it while attempting to add texture and increase transparency with the paper towel. Before it dries completely, I'm going to attempt to interrupt the drying process with a damp paintbrush. The pigment is thinner because I blotted it with a paper towel, and look at how a tiny bit of water makes it quite translucent. My palette still has full-strength wet acrylic on it, so I'm using that to suggest letters and numbers. Keep in mind that if you want letters and numbers to print in a readable sequence, you should flip your reference photo horizontally using an app on your phone or your computer before printing it. I used Strathmore lightweight printmaking paper for this and tore it against a ruler to mimic the approximate size of the Monotype plate. I'm squirting one layer of fine mist water on the paper and then blotting it with a paper towel right away before it has a chance to sink in. To transfer the image, you can use the back of a paintbrush, the end of a toothbrush, a wooden drawer pull, a printmaking baron, the back of a metal soup spoon, or a wooden spoon. If the paper starts to pill from rubbing, lay a sheet of newsprint or wax paper on the back to create a slicker rubbing surface. And be careful to avoid moving the plate to paper contact point or you'll get a staggered image. Use firm to medium pressure and make sure that you've made contact between paper and plate everywhere on your image to pick up that paint. Cleanup is super easy, just water and a paper towel or a rag. Now that you have a print to refer to, you can see what worked and what you'd like to alter. While it's fresh in your mind, this might be the best time to make another monotype of the same image, bringing to it everything that you just learned. A little pigment bleed happened along the edge of this print from too much moisture, either from my brushwork or inadequate spritz blotting on the paper or both, but no big deal. We'll move on to add color and a bit of detail. I've added transparent watercolor washes and a little bit of colored pencil. Adding other media to your monotypes is a wonderful way to lift them from just okay to just right or closer to it. The benefit of most printmaking inks and acrylics is that colored pencil attaches to the pigment like chalk on a blackboard. In these examples of white line monotypes on a dark field, the finished print can be completely transformed with colored pencil alone. And here are more examples of drawing transfer monotypes and dark field monotypes using watercolor and colored pencil on top of the print after the ink is dry. There are also examples of some monotype ghost prints, which are perfect underpaintings for a little bit of watercolor, and if you want to add colored pencil, you could do that too. Or even pastel. If you know you want to use something like watercolor on top of a monotype, be sure that you're starting with a paper that can handle wet media. Also, if you used printmaking ink, check the manufacturer's details to make sure that the ink won't re-wet if you go over it with a wet paintbrush or other wet media.